Black CEO told. "You don't belong up here." In the Sky Lounge moments later, she buys the floor above the billionaire. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel is losing traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can help us. It's quick, free, and allows us to continue bringing you great content. Your support means everything. Let's keep this channel growing collectively. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the story. In the plush, exclusive atmosphere of a high-end Sky Lounge, the tension was palpable. The sleek glass windows that offered a stunning view of the city below contrasted with the sharp exchange taking place inside. A black CEO, dressed in a sharp black blazer and understated elegance, stood facing an older white man whose dismissive posture was as clear as his words. "You don't belong up here." The CEO's expression remained calm, her gaze unwavering. A silent defiance that caused the air to thicken. Around them, a few onlookers observed, some with disapproval, others simply curious. The man, however, wasn't done. He continued to berate her, convinced that his wealth and privilege placed him above her. But what he didn't know was that his words were about to trigger a sequence of events that would shift the balance of power. Moments later, the CEO made a call. The floor above his floor was now hers. But this wasn't just a simple act of purchasing real estate. No, this was a statement, a powerful moment where one man's discrimination was met with an unspoken, undeniable truth. She wasn't just here to survive. She was here to own the space he thought he controlled. The story of this incredible reversal was only just beginning. The atmosphere in the Sky Lounge was thick with tension as the black CEO, still standing tall, locked eyes with the man who had just dismissed her so arrogantly. His words, "You don't belong up here," echoed in her mind, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she held her ground, her expression calm, yet unyielding. The onlookers around her shifted uncomfortably, some whispering among themselves, others staring at the unfolding scene. The older man, now visibly irritated, leaned in closer, his voice dripping with condescension as he demanded, "I don't know who you think you are, but people like you don't belong in spaces like this. You're nothing more than a disruptor." His words felt like a slap, each syllable a reminder of the systemic racism she had battled her entire life. But she wasn't here to argue. She was here to make him realize just how wrong he was. With a composed sigh, she turned slightly, glancing at the concierge who had been watching the exchange from a distance, her eyes filled with silent acknowledgement. This was it, the moment everything would change. With one hand, the CEO reached for her phone, unlocking it with a practiced motion as her assistant's number popped up on the screen. She didn't need to say a word. "It's time," she said into the phone, her voice steady, but carrying an unmistakable weight of authority. A moment later, the phone clicked off, and the room seemed to hold its breath. The man in front of her hadn't yet noticed that his words had triggered something far greater than his limited understanding of the world around him. He was so sure of his place, so certain that power belonged to people like him, that he hadn't considered the quiet strength that lay in the woman standing before him. What he didn't know was that she wasn't just any woman, she was the owner of the entire building, and in a few moments, his arrogance would cost him more than he could ever have imagined. Meanwhile, the other patrons in the lounge were starting to realize the gravity of the situation, the underlying tension rippling through them like an electric current. Their eyes flickered between the CEO and the man, some offering looks of silent support, others unsure how to react. But as the CEO turned back toward her opponent, the final blow came with chilling clarity. "I own this building," she said softly, her words carrying like a storm breaking the silence. "In fact, I own the floor above you. That means everything here, including the space you so casually dismissed me from, belongs to me. The question now is, do you want to continue your tirade, or should we simply consider this your last day in this lounge?" The room was quiet for a beat, the weight of her statement sinking in. The man's face drained of color as he stammered, trying to find a response, but the words wouldn't come. The CEO didn't wait for him to speak. She turned on her heel and walked confidently toward the exit, her head held high. The guests in the lounge were still processing what had just happened, some in disbelief, others in awe. The man, defeated, was left standing there, surrounded by the palpable tension of a room that had just witnessed an undeniable shift in power. Moments later, the CEO's phone buzzed in her hand. She glanced at the message, a small, satisfied smile tugging at the corner of her lips. The floor she had just purchased was hers now, and with that acquisition, she had claimed more than just real estate. She had claimed her rightful place in the world. A place where people like the man who had belittled her would no longer be able to dominate or dismiss. This was only the beginning of her mission to reshape the way power, respect, and equality were viewed in spaces once dominated by those who thought they were untouchable. As the CEO walked confidently out of the lounge, the weight of the moment settled heavily in the air behind her, the power shift undeniable. The room remained still for a few moments, as if the very walls of the Sky Lounge had absorbed the tension that had just been unleashed. The older man, still standing in shock, watched her leave, his arrogance now replaced with a dawning realization of the mistake he had made. His words, once sharp and dismissive, now seemed hollow in the face of the woman who had not only owned the space, but had just changed the narrative. Outside, the sound of the city echoed around her as the CEO made her way down the corridor, her mind already moving forward to the next step in her plan. She wasn't finished, not by a long shot. She had built this empire not through brute force, but with strategy, intelligence, and patience, qualities that no amount of privilege or dismissive attitude could ever erase. She pulled out her phone again, this time dialing her assistant, Carla, who answered immediately. "It's done," the CEO said, her voice calm but carrying an unmistakable edge of authority. "I've bought the floor. It's time to move forward with the next phase. Let's make sure the right people know exactly what happened here today." Carla responded with a sharp acknowledgement, her voice matching the CEO's professionalism. "Understood. I'll make sure everything is in place. The message is already being prepared for release. It's going to make waves." The CEO's lips curled into a small smile as she hung up the phone, her gaze focused ahead. She knew that this was just the beginning. Her actions today would resonate far beyond the walls of this lounge. There were going to be repercussions, and those who had underestimated her would soon realize that their ignorance had cost them far more than they could have imagined. Meanwhile, back in the Sky Lounge, the man who had dismissed her stood frozen, his eyes darting around at the patrons who had silently observed the exchange. Whispers had begun to circulate, and a few brave souls had even taken out their phones, recording the confrontation as it unfolded. One of the onlookers, a young woman who had been quietly watching, couldn't help but speak up. "I can't believe what just happened," she muttered to her companion. Did she really just buy the floor above him? Her voice was filled with a mix of disbelief and awe, and her companion nodded, his own shock written across his face. "I think she just changed everything. That man thought he had power, but she showed him how quickly that can disappear." The lounge was slowly returning to its normal rhythm, but the energy had shifted. People were talking, some in hushed tones, others more openly discussing the moment they had just witnessed. The CEO's quiet act of reclaiming power had not only silenced one man, but it had also ignited something in the room. For many, it was a moment of reckoning. For others, it was a reminder that power was never truly held by those who thought they were untouchable. As the CEO left the building, her hand tightening around the phone in her pocket, she didn't look back. The future was unfolding before her, and she was ready to face whatever came next. She had made her mark, and now, she would continue to reshape the world around her. As the CEO stepped into the sleek black sedan that was waiting for her outside, the weight of what had just transpired still hung in the air, but there was no sense of relief. Her mind was already calculating the next move, the next strategic step. She had grown accustomed to being underestimated, to having her presence dismissed by those who saw her as nothing more than a passing figure in a world that was designed to exclude people like her. But today, she had flipped the script. The soft hum of the engine was almost therapeutic as the car drove through the city streets, the lights of the skyline reflecting off the windows, a stark contrast to the intensity of the events that had just unfolded. Her assistant, Carla, called again, her voice crisp and urgent. "Everything is in motion. The message has been sent to the board. We're preparing the press release now. It's going to be everywhere." The CEO nodded, a slight smile playing at the corners of her lips. Good. Let them talk. Let them spread it. I want everyone to know what happened today. But make sure we control the narrative. We don't want to leave room for any misinterpretation. Carla's voice was unwavering. Understood. I'll make sure it's framed exactly how we want it. We've already received confirmation from the legal team that everything's in place. This isn't just about buying a floor, it's about sending a message that can't be ignored. The CEO leaned back in her seat, her fingers tapping lightly on her phone. She wasn't the kind of leader who sought fame or praise. Her power was always quiet, deliberate, and effective. She knew the value of being underestimated. It gave her the space to make the moves that mattered, without interference. As the car sped toward the office, her thoughts raced. She had only begun to expose the layers of ignorance and privilege that had been allowed to thrive in these spaces, but there was so much more to do. The fight was far from over. She had learned long ago that just one act of defiance wasn't enough to change an entire system. It would take sustained effort, a level of power and influence that could not be easily dismissed. The world she was navigating was built on centuries of exclusion, and she wasn't just aiming to participate in it, she was there to tear it down. When the car finally arrived at the building, she stepped out with purpose, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement as she made her way into the lobby. The doorman, who had barely glanced at her when she entered the Sky Lounge earlier that day, now looked up, a flicker of recognition passing over his face. But the CEO didn't even spare him a glance as she walked past, her eyes forward, her mind focused on the task at hand. Inside, her team was already waiting for her. They had been briefed, ready for the next phase of the operation. The atmosphere in the room was one of quiet anticipation. There was no need for grand speeches or declarations. The team knew what had to be done. "We've got work to do," the CEO said, her voice low but filled with the power of someone who knew exactly how to take control of a room. "Let's make sure the people who think they can control this narrative understand who really holds the reins." Her words were not just a directive, they were a promise. And with that, she began the next phase of her journey, one that would forever change the way power and respect were measured in the spaces she now owned. As the CEO walked into the sleek, modern conference room, her presence immediately filled the space. The team, all eyes on her, stood silently, waiting for her next move. They had seen her in action before, but today, there was something different in the air, something that could only be described as a shift in the balance of power. She moved toward the head of the table with a quiet confidence, every step deliberate. She didn't need to say anything immediately. The weight of her actions earlier that day had already spoken volumes. As she took her seat, she finally addressed the room, her voice calm but commanding. "Today was a moment," she said, looking around at the team, making sure they understood the gravity of the situation. "But it's just the beginning. I didn't buy that floor to make a statement. I bought it to own the space, to change the way things work here. What we do next will be what defines us, not just as a company, but as leaders in this industry." The room was still, absorbing her words. The CEO paused for a moment, letting the silence linger before she continued. "The people who've had power in these spaces for years have become complacent. They've grown accustomed to treating people like me, people of color, as outsiders. It's time we show them just how wrong they are. We're not here to ask for a seat at the table. We're here to build our own table." The team nodded, sensing the intensity in her voice. This was no longer just about corporate strategy. This was about reshaping a system that had been built on exclusion. The CEO's plan was clear, and everyone in the room understood their role in it. She wasn't here to play the game, they were here to change it. "First, we make sure that every board member understands the magnitude of today's events. I want a press release that doesn't just talk about a property acquisition. I want it to highlight everything. The systemic bias, the privilege, the arrogance. Let's make sure everyone knows what happens when you treat people like they don't belong." She looked directly at Carla, who had been taking notes throughout the meeting. "You've got the details. Set up the briefing with the board. Get the press ready. We're going public with this, but on our terms." Carla nodded, her expression firm. "It's already in motion. We're scheduling the release for tomorrow morning. The board will get the full report, and I've already spoken with legal about handling the media inquiries." The CEO smiled slightly. Good. I want this to hit hard. This isn't about winning one battle. This is about breaking down barriers that have been in place for generations. We're going to make sure that no one ever forgets who we are and what we stand for. She stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. As her team dispersed to execute the next steps of the plan, the CEO remained standing for a moment longer, looking out the window at the city below. Her empire was already taking shape, and this was just the beginning. The world was about to see how one woman could not only break the rules, but redefine them. And as she walked out of the room, she knew she was one step closer to building something that would leave a lasting legacy, one that would change the world and the way people saw power forever. The next morning, the CEO walked into the building with a sense of quiet determination. The press release had gone out as planned, and the responses were already starting to flood in. The media, eager for a story, had picked up the angle quickly. A powerful black woman not only challenging the status quo but claiming what was rightfully hers. She entered her office, the weight of the moment settling in her chest, but she didn't allow herself to pause for long. Her assistant, Carla, was already waiting, her expression one of intense focus. "The board is in position," Carla said, her voice steady but tinged with excitement. "They've all seen the press release, and there's been a lot of discussion already. Some are questioning your methods, but others are fully on board." The CEO nodded, her fingers lightly tapping on the desk. "I expected resistance. It's always the way with change, but they'll come around. Power isn't about asking for permission. It's about taking what's yours and making sure everyone knows exactly what you're doing with it." Carla handed her a file, the corners of the pages slightly bent from handling. "Here's the latest report. We're scheduled for a meeting with the board in an hour. We've already briefed the key players, and the press is waiting for a statement." The CEO took the file, her eyes scanning the contents quickly, absorbing the data before looking up at Carla. "Good. Let's make sure that we're not just talking about acquisitions and numbers. Let's talk about impact, about the shift in power, about the future that's already unfolding, because we decided not to wait for anyone's permission." Carla nodded and left the room to prepare for the meeting, leaving the CEO to reflect. She knew this wasn't just a corporate maneuver, it was a declaration. Her actions yesterday had reverberated through the building, and now, it was time for the next step. The world had seen her power, and now, she would make sure it wasn't easily forgotten. The meeting with the board began promptly, and as the CEO stood before them, she could feel their eyes on her, some with skepticism, others with admiration. But none of them could deny the undeniable truth of her presence. "I didn't buy that floor to make a statement," she began, her voice calm, yet cutting through the room like a blade. "I bought it because I deserve it, and I bought it because I am not afraid to take what's mine. Power has always been held by those who believe they are entitled to it, but I am here to change that. This is about shifting the entire paradigm." She paused, letting her words sink in, before continuing. "This isn't just about real estate. This is about rewriting the rules of how people like me are treated. We are not here to ask for a seat at the table. We are here to build our own table, and let the world see that we deserve to be there. There is no going back from this. What I started yesterday is just the beginning, and we will continue to push forward. Those who doubt us, those who think we don't belong, will soon see just how wrong they are. We are here to stay, and we will not be ignored." As she finished speaking, there was a moment of silence in the room, but it was a silence of respect, not doubt. The board members, once unsure, now saw the CEO for what she truly was, a force to be reckoned with. They would follow her lead, or they would be left behind. The CEO knew she had made her mark, and there was no going back now. Her journey had only just begun, and the world was going to have to adjust to the new rules of power. The following days moved quickly, but the CEO remained laser-focused on her vision. The press coverage from the previous day's announcement had exploded, the story spreading far beyond the business world, stirring conversations across social media and news outlets. She could feel the eyes of the world on her, some in disbelief, some in admiration, and others, undoubtedly, in anger. But the one thing they couldn't ignore was that she had made an undeniable impact. She walked into her office that morning, greeted by Carla, who was already waiting with the latest updates. The board meeting went well, Carla said, a slight smile creeping onto her face. They're finally on board, but it's clear that some still don't fully understand the magnitude of what you're doing. They're starting to ask questions, big questions. The CEO nodded, her expression unreadable. Good. Let them ask. It's not about them understanding right away. It's about showing them that we're not waiting for permission anymore. We're doing this because it's time, and no one can stop us now. Carla handed over a stack of papers, the latest reports from the media and their investors. You've made waves, no doubt, but there's been some pushback from certain sectors. People are beginning to question your long-term strategy. The CEO didn't flinch. Let them question. Let them doubt. This isn't about short-term gains. It's about laying the groundwork for a future where people like me, people of color, women are not just participants, but leaders. The world is waking up, whether they want to or not. She paused for a moment, letting the weight of her words settle in. We're going to continue on this path, and we're going to make sure that anyone who doubts us has no choice but to respect us. And if they don't, we'll just keep proving them wrong. This isn't just about money or power. It's about rewriting history. The determination in her voice was unmistakable. Carla looked at her, understanding exactly what she meant. I'll make sure we continue to push forward. I'll get in touch with the media and ensure the narrative stays on track. We've already seen a lot of positive feedback from the investors. They see what we're building, and they're ready to back it. The CEO smiled slightly. Good. Let's keep that momentum going. We've only just begun, but this is the kind of power that doesn't get built in a day. We're going to change this industry from the inside out, one step at a time. As Carla left to take care of the tasks at hand, the CEO sat back in her chair, looking out the window at the bustling city below. She had faced challenges before, but this time was different. This time, she wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for everyone who had been held back by systems of exclusion, and with every step she took, she could feel the ground shifting beneath her. The world wasn't ready for her, but that didn't matter. She was ready for the world. The following weeks unfolded with a determined rhythm, the CEO's plans now taking shape in ways that would be impossible to ignore. She had expected resistance, but what she didn't anticipate was the ripple effect her actions would have across the industry. Investors, once skeptical, were now lining up to support her vision. The media coverage, which had started as a mere story about a powerful woman taking control, had evolved into a full-blown narrative on systemic change, power, and inequality. She had become a symbol, a leader not just in her field, but in a larger movement to dismantle the barriers that had kept so many people from reaching the top. But it wasn't just about her. It was about showing the world that others could rise alongside her, that the playing field didn't have to be tilted in favor of the privileged few. As she sat in her office, reviewing the latest reports, Carla came in with a look of quiet anticipation. We've got more interest than we anticipated, Carla said, laying a set of documents on the CEO's desk. Investors are pushing for even bigger commitments. The message is starting to land, and people are taking note. The CEO glanced over the papers, her eyes narrowing slightly as she processed the information. Good, but it's not just about interest. We need to make sure we're being strategic. This isn't a momentary win. This is about shifting the entire foundation. Carla nodded, understanding the weight behind the words. The board is pushing for a meeting next week. They want to discuss the long-term vision. There's still a lot of skepticism, but it's clear that your leadership has gained traction. The CEO leaned back in her chair, a small, confident smile crossing her face. Let them be skeptical. Doubt has always been a companion of progress. I didn't expect them to just fall in line, but they will. And if they don't, they'll be left behind. She paused, her eyes focused on the horizon beyond her office window. This isn't just about one company. This is about creating a new blueprint for how businesses, organizations, and leaders operate. We're not here to follow the old rules. We're here to break them and build something better, more inclusive, and more powerful than anything that has come before. Carla seemed to take in the full weight of the moment. I'll make sure the board is prepared for that message. We've already seen the shift happening, but now it's time to cement it. The CEO nodded. Yes, it's time to show them that this is no longer just talk. We've proven that we can move mountains. Now, we'll make sure they understand the scale of what we're building." As Carla left the room to prepare for the upcoming meeting, the CEO stood up, walking toward the window. The city below seemed to be buzzing with activity, but she was no longer just a spectator. She was a part of that movement, that energy, that change. She had taken the first step, and now the world would have to catch up. The power dynamics were shifting, and she was at the center of it all. She knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was ready. The world would see the changes she was making, and they would see her for who she truly was, a force to be reckoned with, someone who was rewriting the rules and paving the way for others to follow. The day of the board meeting arrived, and the atmosphere in the conference room was charged with anticipation. The CEO entered, her presence commanding the room as always, but today there was a noticeable shift in the way everyone looked at her. The skepticism that had once lingered was replaced by cautious respect. As she took her seat at the head of the table, the board members, who had once questioned her every decision, now sat silently, waiting for her to speak. "We've made incredible progress," the CEO began, her voice firm but measured. "But we are not here to bask in our achievements. We are here to build something that will outlast us, something that will change the way business is done. Today, we solidify the future." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in, before continuing. "We've proven that we can disrupt the old system. We've shown that power is not given. It is taken. And now, we must expand that power. This is about more than just profit margins and market share. It's about setting a new standard." One of the board members, still a little unsure, cleared his throat and spoke up. "You've shaken things up, but there are still concerns about the long-term sustainability of this approach. What makes you think this isn't just a flash in the pan?" The CEO didn't hesitate. "Because this isn't just about one acquisition or one moment. This is about an entire redefinition of how leadership works, how people of color and women are treated in these spaces. The old ways of doing business are dying, and we are the ones driving that change." The room fell into an almost uncomfortable silence. There was no denying the truth of what she said, but for some, it was a hard pill to swallow. Another board member spoke, her voice tinged with curiosity. "So, what's next? How do we scale this vision? How do we make sure it's not just about us, but about creating a lasting impact?" The CEO's gaze was steady as she replied, "Next, we take the power we've gained and make it accessible. We bring in others who have been left behind, give them a seat at the table, and allow them to build with us. We ensure that every person who is treated as an outsider today will have the opportunity to lead tomorrow." She paused, locking eyes with each person around the table. "We will create a pipeline. We will mentor, and we will elevate those who have been silenced for far too long. Our success will not just be ours, it will belong to everyone we bring along." A shift took place in the room. It was subtle, but undeniable. The board members, who had initially been skeptical, now saw the power of her vision. This was no longer just a business strategy, it was a movement, one that had the potential to change the very foundation of the corporate world. The CEO knew the journey wouldn't be easy, but she had already taken the hardest step. She had shown the world that it was possible to challenge the system, to tear down the walls that had been built to keep certain people out. Now, she was ready to finish what she had started, to turn her vision into something that would last long after she was gone. As the CEO left the boardroom, a sense of accomplishment washed over her, but there was no time to dwell. She knew that the real work was only just beginning. Her vision had resonated with the board, but now she had to prove that it could become a reality. The shift in power, the new direction she had set, needed to be solidified, and it had to be done carefully. The stakes were higher now than they had ever been, and she was determined to ensure that this movement, this revolution, was more than just a fleeting moment. She had already begun planning the next phase of her strategy, a comprehensive diversity and leadership initiative that would change the corporate landscape. As she walked through the hallways of the building, her mind was already working on the details. She would personally oversee the mentoring programs, ensuring that they weren't just token gestures, but that they led to real, lasting change. There would be opportunities for people who had been systematically overlooked, and she would make sure that these individuals were not only given chances, but that they would succeed. She had been given opportunities when others were told no, when others were dismissed because of their race, gender, or background. And now, she was in a position to do the same for others. In her office, Carla was already preparing the next set of meetings. The media was still buzzing about the acquisition, and investors were calling to discuss future projects. The CEO was in demand, but it was the calls from people in her community, young Black professionals, women, and others, who had long been excluded from corporate spaces that were truly meaningful to her. They wanted to hear from her, wanted to know how they could be part of the change she was leading. She answered a few calls, her voice calm but filled with purpose. Each conversation fueled her drive even further. This is bigger than just me, she thought to herself as she wrapped up the last call. She stood by the window, staring out at the city below, feeling the weight of her responsibility. She wasn't just building a business, she was reshaping an entire industry. The power she wielded was not just in the deals she made or the properties she acquired, but in the lives she could change, in the doors she could open for others. It was about more than just breaking barriers for herself. It was about showing the world that people like her, and everyone who had been told they didn't belong, deserved their place in these spaces. With a renewed sense of determination, she knew that she had just started a journey that would alter the course of history, one decision at a time. She wasn't just going to leave a mark, she was going to leave a legacy built on strength, resilience, and the relentless pursuit of equality. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of meetings, press releases, and strategy sessions. The CEO's plan was moving forward, but it wasn't without challenges. As the public buzz around her acquisition continued to build, so did the pushback from those who felt threatened by her success. But she was ready. She had faced adversity her entire life, and this was no different. In fact, this was the moment she had been waiting for. This was her time to shine, to prove that her vision for leadership could no longer be ignored. As the CEO sat in her office reviewing the latest financial projections, her phone buzzed with another message from Carla. The investors are requesting a meeting. They're impressed with your progress, but they want to discuss your long-term strategy. They're curious about how you plan to maintain growth while still adhering to your principles. The CEO smiled, her fingers gently tapping the edge of the desk. She had expected this. Investors wanted to see the numbers, the return on investment, and the sustainability of her methods. They were used to seeing people with power behave one way, calculating, cold, and detached. But she wasn't that type of leader. She had always believed that true leadership wasn't just about profits, it was about people. "I'll meet with them," she replied, her voice steady. "But make sure they understand that my vision goes beyond numbers. It's about legacy. It's about building something that lasts, something that has meaning. We will be successful because we won't just change how business is done. We'll change who gets to be a part of it." Carla nodded and left the room to schedule the meeting, while the CEO stood and walked toward the window, gazing out over the city skyline. The buildings stood tall and imposing, a testament to the power structures that had existed for so long. But she wasn't intimidated. The structures that had once kept people like her out were slowly crumbling, and she was the one doing the tearing down. She had become a force that no one could ignore, and she wasn't going to stop now. She knew that true change didn't come easily. It took persistence, strategy, and an unwavering belief in what she was doing. She had seen too many others like her pushed aside, their voices silenced by the weight of a system designed to keep them down. But now, she had the power to change that system from the inside out. The moment the investors walked into her office, she could feel their skepticism, their doubts, but she remained calm, composed. She knew that if they were truly going to understand her vision, they needed to see more than just the numbers. They needed to see her passion, her drive, and her commitment to something bigger than just financial success. "I understand you have concerns," she began, her voice confident and clear. "But let me make this very clear. I didn't build this empire by conforming to the old rules. I built it by breaking them, and I will continue to do so, for as long as I'm in charge. We're not just looking for short-term profits, we're building a legacy." The room was silent for a moment as the investors exchanged glances. She could tell they were processing her words, weighing the long-term potential of her vision. But she wasn't worried. She had already proved herself, and she would continue to do so, one decision at a time. As the meeting came to a close, she stood up, offering a handshake to the investors, her grip firm and assured. "I look forward to showing you what we can achieve together," she said, her smile unwavering. The door closed behind them, and as she sat back in her chair, she felt the weight of the future in her hands. This was just the beginning, and she was ready to lead the way. Weeks passed, and the changes the CEO had set in motion were now becoming undeniable. The team had grown stronger, more united by her vision, and investors were not only backing her, but were starting to see the long-term value of the cultural shift she was creating. The CEO's office had become a hub of strategy and innovation, and each decision she made seemed to resonate far beyond the walls of her company. Yet, despite the overwhelming support and success, she knew that the real test was still ahead. She had managed to build something that demanded respect, but she had also built something that would face fierce opposition from the old guard, the ones who had profited from maintaining the status quo. As she sat in her office late one evening, reviewing the latest financial reports and preparing for another round of meetings, the weight of the moment finally hit her. She wasn't just changing her company, she was changing an entire industry. She had created a ripple effect that could not be undone. The doors she had opened for others, the seats she had made available at the table, were just the beginning. Now, it was time for her to take the final step. She dialed Carla's number, her voice clear and decisive when Carla answered. "It's time," she said simply, before hanging up. The next morning, the CEO arrived at the headquarters early, walking with purpose through the hallways. The staff knew something significant was happening, and they watched as she made her way to the conference room. There was no announcement, no fanfare, only a quiet determination. As the board members took their seats, the CEO stood at the head of the table, her presence commanding the room. "We've reached a point where the world can no longer ignore what we're doing here," she began, her voice calm but filled with conviction. "But the real question is, what do we do now? We've disrupted the old systems, but there is so much more work to do. The next phase isn't about expanding our reach, it's about deepening the impact we're having. It's about reshaping the way power, leadership, and opportunity are viewed. This movement isn't just about profit or growth. It's about breaking the mold for good." She paused, letting her words hang in the air. "We've proven we can make waves. Now, we must ensure that these waves continue to push us forward, and that we become the foundation for future leaders to rise from all walks of life." There was a moment of silence in the room as the board members absorbed what she had said. The CEO could see the shift in their eyes. They had all watched her rise to this moment, and now they were ready to follow her lead. The future was no longer something that was far off, it was here, and it was hers to shape. She smiled slightly, a glimmer of satisfaction in her eyes. "Let's make history." As the meeting adjourned, the CEO felt a deep sense of accomplishment, but she knew this was only the beginning. She had built something that was bigger than herself, something that would change the corporate world forever. And as she walked out of the room, she realized that she wasn't just fighting for a seat at the table, she had built a whole new table, and everyone who had been kept out would now have a place to sit,